Last week I showed how petrification doesn't take millions of years to occur, and how many man-made things have been found which prove that the rock layers can't be millions of years old. I've been slowly showing example after example of reasons why our worldwide belief in millions of years is actually a giant hoax. A hoax created by the devil, and humanity got tricked into believing him. So today, I'm going to show a whole bunch more various scientific reasons why the Earth can't be millions of years old, and has to be only several thousand years old. None of these reasons are based on what the Bible says. Every reason is based on empirical science, which means that someone performed an experiment and it produced the same result every time it was performed. That's real science, not the fake science where they dug up a tooth and then drew what the imaginary animal looked like from just one tooth. Now, these examples are going to be all over the place, ranging from astronomy to linguistics, from deserts to ice cores. This goes to show that the evidence for a young Earth is actually consistent among every branch of science. It doesn't matter which science you look at, biology, geology, astronomy, or whatever, they all fall in line with what the Bible says about God creating everything only 6,000 years ago. Today, we have roughly 7 billion people on the planet. We also know that in the early 1800s, there was only about 1 billion people. And 2,000 years ago, it's agreed by secular science that there was only about 250,000 people in the world. Following that population curve, the human population started only thousands of years ago, not millions. The theory of evolution claims that modern man evolved 1,000,000 years ago. The Bible teaches that Adam was created only 6,000 years ago. That's a huge difference between 6,000 and 1,000,000. 6,000 is less than 1% of 1,000,000. So if mankind was supposedly here 1,000,000 years ago, then there should logically be a whole lot more people on Earth today than just 7 billion. It should be more like 7 trillion, based on the factor of 1%. Here's another thing about the human population. Secular science has even discovered through DNA that there was a genetic bottleneck that occurred long ago that reduced the human population to only a few thousand people because of some kind of catastrophe. They claim it was a volcano that caused the near extinction of man. But what do you know? That just happens to fit perfectly with the idea that 4,400 years ago, a worldwide flood reduced the human population from a whole bunch all the way down to only 8. Secular science sees how the population numbers point to the flood, but they refuse to believe it and dream up some alternative, unprovable theory. While I'm here, I'll mention linguistics. The study of all the world's languages all point to them all starting only thousands of years ago. All of the ancient civilizations have an interesting similarity. They all just poof out of nowhere without any gradual ascent. There's no evidence of the myth of them being hunter-gatherers that eventually turned into an empire over 1,000,000 years. Instead, all the evidence points to there being nobody, and then all of a sudden, within 100 years, there being an empire. Well, that's exactly what the Bible teaches in Genesis chapter 10, which is known as the Table of Nations. After the flood, Noah's sons and grandsons started the first nations, such as Egypt, Babylon, Syria, Greece, and even Sodom and Gomorrah. Did you know that the ancient Chinese symbol for boat was 8 mouths in a vessel? That sure sounds like Noah's Ark to me. Did you know their symbol for garden was dust plus breath plus 2 people in an enclosure? The Garden of Eden was Adam, whom God made from dust and breathed life into him, and Eve in an enclosed garden. Their ancient language was based on biblical truth, not evolution. And it's not like the Chinese were influenced by the Hebrews being thousands of miles away. No, the Chinese came from people who got off of Noah's Ark, but then traveled very far away from the Ark to eventually settle in present-day China. Okay, looking at astronomy, there are a number of ways to show that the universe can't be billions of years old. Let's talk about the sun first. Did you know that it's shrinking? It's literally getting smaller by about 5 feet a year. That obviously means that it used to be bigger. If you go back billions of years, that would create several serious problems. The size of the sun would have been so big that it would invade the orbits of the closest planets. The existence of Mercury and Venus, and maybe even Earth, would be impossible. The gravity of a larger sun would have sucked in all the planets out of their orbits. And a larger sun would have been dimmer, and therefore not able to produce enough sunlight for photosynthesis to occur on Earth. The sun can't be billions of years old. Let's now talk about the moon. Did you know that it's slowly getting farther away from us? Every year, the moon gets a couple of inches further away. We've never seen it get closer. It's always been receding. That would mean that long ago, it used to be closer to us. If you go back billions of years, the moon would have crashed into the Earth less than 2 billion years ago. But they claim the Earth and moon are both 4.6 billion years old. Also, because the moon creates the tides on Earth would have destroyed everything. How about comets? Did you know that comets are constantly losing material? That's why they have tails. They are slowly losing all of their mass and getting smaller. The life expectancy of a comet is only 10,000 years at the most. So if the universe is supposedly billions of years old, then why do we still have any comets flying around? They'd all be dissipated by now. Now someone might say they come from the Oort cloud, but nobody has ever seen an Oort cloud. It was completely made up by a guy named Oort, trying to imagine up an excuse for why we still have comets. Oort never saw his supposed Oort cloud. Even Carl Sagan said, "There is not yet a shred of direct observational evidence for its existence." There is no Oort cloud. The reason we still have comets today is because the universe is not billions of years old. A few more things about the universe. Galaxies are commonly seen in a spiral shape, right? Did you know that they are unwinding? The stars on the outside are moving slower than the stars on the inside. That's able to be measured empirically. Therefore, within billions of years, those spiral shapes would be completely unwound and no longer in the shape of a spiral. If the universe was truly billions of years old, there should be no spiral galaxies. Scientists have been able to determine that we see a star blow up roughly every 30 years. A blown-up star becomes what's called a supernova. Yet we can only see roughly 300 supernovas in the sky. That would only account for thousands of years, not billions. We should be able to see a whole lot more supernova in the sky if the universe was really billions of years old, like several 100 million of them instead of just 30. They say it takes billions of years for stars to change from a red giant star into a white dwarf star. But only 2,000 years ago, ancient astronomers described Sirius as a red star, redder than Mars. And today, it's a white star. It went from being a red star to a white star in less than 2,000 years, not billions. The planet Saturn has rings. Everyone knows that. But did you know they are expanding away from the planet? If the planet was truly billions of years old, those rings would be long gone by now. The planet Jupiter is losing heat. They can measure how fast it's happening. If it was really billions of years old, it would be completely cold by now. And Jupiter also has a moon named Ganymede, that has a hot liquid metal core and a strong magnetic field, which would be completely gone by now if it were really billions of years old. Even the Earth itself has a magnetic field that has been weakening. It's declined by 10% in just the last 150 years, and by 40% in the last 1,000 years. Without getting into technicalities, this proves the planet can't possibly be more than 25,000 years old, and certainly can't be even close to 1 million years old, or let alone 4.6 billion years old. Did you know that the Earth's rotation has been slowing down? That means it used to be spinning faster. Take that back billions of years, and it would have been spinning too fast, and both centrifugal force and wind speed would have made life impossible. Scientists have measured how quickly the continents are eroding away. At the current rate, they'd all be eroded flat in only 14 million years. How can they possibly be billions of years old? All the continents would be completely flat by now, or worse, everything would have eroded into the oceans by now. Scientists have measured how much salt is in the ocean and how fast the amount of salt goes up. It gets saltier and saltier every year, but the amount of salt only accounts for thousands of years, not billions. Buried deep underground is a bunch of crude oil, right? Well, did you know that scientists have been able to measure how much pressure that oil is under? It's been squished by all the rock layers above it that it wants to squirt out. The rock layers above it will crack under that pressure and eventually form a pathway for the oil to escape. Scientists have actually measured that the pressure is so high that the rock could only possibly hold it back for only 10,000 years at the most. Within 10,000 years, it would crack up the rock and break through to release the pressure. So if it really takes millions of years for oil to form underground, then why can't it stay underground for millions of years? Well, guess what? It actually doesn't take millions of years for oil to form. Scientists have been creating oil in laboratories for decades now. They can take things like sewer sludge and turkey guts and turn it into oil in 30 minutes. There's no reason to believe that oil requires millions of years to form. Let's talk about the age of some things on Earth. I've already mentioned Niagara Falls in a previous sermon, but I'll bring it up again now that after measuring the natural rate of erosion, it's impossible that Niagara Falls could be millions of years old. It would have been completely eroded away long, long ago. In the same way, the Mississippi Delta has been measured of how much sediment is deposited every year, and it's not even close to being enough for millions of years. If the planet was 4.6 billion years old, the Gulf of Mexico should be completely full of mud by now. But the actual amount of sediment found there fits perfectly with the current rate of yearly sedimentary deposit, along with what would have happened during Noah's flood. The Sahara Desert has been measured to see how fast it spreads through a natural process called desertification, caused by hot air wind patterns. Based on those measurements, it's been determined that the Sahara Desert is roughly 4,000 years old. Noah's flood happened 4,400 years ago. If the planet was really billions of years old, why don't we have an older desert somewhere? Why does the oldest desert on the planet just happen to be less than 4,400 years old? It's the same argument with the oldest trees and even the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia. We don't have any trees or coral reefs that are millions of years old. Everything is found to be thousands of years old. Now let me take a minute to address something. Many years ago, it was believed that the oldest tree was 4,300 years old, which fits perfectly within the time frame of Noah's flood. The textbooks showed pictures of the Earth's oldest tree, a bristlecone pine. But then something happened. Creationists started pointing out that the oldest known tree helps prove that Noah's flood actually happened. Suddenly, the Darwinists started finding trees that were supposedly older than the flood. They still weren't millions of years old. They just started saying they were 10,000 years old or 12,000 years old. I find it funny how they didn't find these supposedly older trees until after the creationists started pointing out that their oldest tree was 4,300-year-old bristlecone pine, still fits in within the Noah's flood time frame. Tree dating is not an exact science. Counting the rings of a tree is not a perfect measurement of one ring per year. Tree farmers have cut down trees that were only a year old, yet they have 6 or 7 rings already. Trees can normally produce 2 or 3 rings each year. The rings come from wet or dry spells, not from years. You can have multiple periods of rain per year. Scientists have taken samples of the ice in places like Greenland. They drill out a long cylinder of ice called an ice core. Then they look at those ice cores. They see many rings, similar to tree rings. But they make the same mistake of assuming that those rings represent years. They don't. They only represent when it got hot or cold. And that can happen many, many times during one year. Here's the definitive way to prove ice core rings are not years. During World War II, some airplanes ran out of gas and were forced to land in Greenland. The planes remained there and were buried in the ice. Some rich guy decided to go dig one of them out of the ice. The plane was found buried in 263 feet of ice in only 48 years. That would be about 5.5 feet of ice per year. The guy that dug them out said that there weren't just 48 rings, one per year. There were many hundreds of rings. Ice rings are not an indication of individual years. They're only an indication of seasons of hot and cold, which can happen many times during a single year. How about stalagmites and stalactites? We've been told over and over again that they took millions of years to form inside of caves, right? But that's provably wrong. The Lincoln Memorial was built in 1922, and underneath it, within only 40 years, there are a bunch of stalactites and stalagmites naturally forming. Same story for a building in Indiana that has a huge stalactite formed over the course of only 40 years. A lead mine in Australia was closed for 55 years. When they opened it back up, it was filled with huge stalagmites and stalactites in only 55 years. A pipe under a building in Florida that was dripping water for 7 years formed a 13-inch stalactite. And I saved the best for last. I love this picture, and I'm going to show it to you. A guy in Wyoming stuck a long pipe in the ground where a hot mineral spring was. After about 100 years, this is what it looks like. Oh, look at that thing. That thing is monstrous. There is a human being in that picture for scale, and the thing has got to be 3 times as tall as him. And that thing formed in basically 100 years. Stalactites and stalagmites form the same way from minerals in the water. Okay, so that thing did not take millions of years to form. It took 100 years. Why would we think that stalactites and stalagmites must have taken a million years? You only believe that because that's what the textbooks told you to believe. That huge thing didn't take millions of years to form. It took only 100. Nothing requires millions or billions of years. Everything can be explained within only 6,000 years, just like the Bible says.